So we've looked at pretty much all the fundamentals of CSS and some. In this video, I want to start to look at animation and transitions. Okay, so transitions I'll explain more in the next video. They're basically just animations that happen when we do something to go from one state to another, whether that's the width of something or the color of something, the position. There's a lot of different properties that you can add transitions to. So I'll show you how to create those. We're also going to look at a property we haven't used before called transform, and you can use this to do things like rotate elements, scale elements, translate, which is just move along the X or Y axis. We're going to look at 3D transforms. We're going to create a cool little 3D card project where we click it and it flips over with a 3D effect. And we're also going to look at a little bit of JavaScript and CSS. At the very least, I think knowing how to just dynamically add and remove a class to something, you can do a lot with that. So we're going to take that and create a hamburger menu where on smaller screens we have an icon that we click on and a menu pops out from the side. And when we click on it again, it will go back in. And all that's really doing is adding and removing a certain class that has certain styles. Okay, and having a transition on it makes it come in smoothly. And then we'll also look at keyframes, which is another way of animating elements on your page. And we're going to use that to create a CSS loader animation, something you would see when like you're fetching data and you're waiting for it to get it from the server. You just have a little animation. All right, so that's what we'll be doing in this section. So let's get started. All right, so we're going to start to talk about transitions. And transitions are a way to change property values smoothly over a given amount of time, and they're used to make the user experience more engaging and interactive. So when you hover over a button and it changes color, that's a transition. When you hover over an image and it zooms in, that's a transition, and you can add these within your CSS. Now, when it comes to transitions versus animations, they are similar in that they both change property values over time. However, they differ in how they're triggered and controlled. So with transitions, they're triggered by a change in state, such as hovering over an element. So it's always from one state to another, and they're controlled by the browser and defined using the transition property in CSS. And then animations are triggered by either an event or they can happen automatically on a loop. So you can actually just go to a page and have an animation run. And they're controlled by something called keyframes and are defined by a directive at keyframes in CSS, or a rule, I should say. And we'll get into keyframes very soon. Now, there's a ton of properties that can be animated using transitions. These are just some common ones. So background color and color, obviously you can go from one color to another. You can do it, slowly and just fade into another color. Opacity will change the transparency of an element. Width and height, obviously you can change the size of an element, so you can smoothly go from 100 pixels to 1,000 pixels or whatever. We have borders. You can actually animate transitions to borders. Transform is probably the most common property you're going to use, and I know we haven't talked about transforms yet, but we will very soon. I think the video after the next one. And with transform, you can rotate things. You can move it on either the X or Y axis. You can skew, so you can kind of change the shape of things. You can scale, so you can make it, zoom in, zoom out, make it bigger and smaller. So we'll learn about transforms very soon. Box shadows is another thing you can animate, background position, also the top right, bottom left properties, so you can move things around the window, around the browser. So there's a lot more. Obviously, I couldn't fit them all on the page, but these are just some common ones. Now, the transition property is used to define the transition effect for an element. And this is the syntax here. So you have the property, which you want to animate or add a transition to. And we have an example here on a button. And we're saying we want to animate the background color property. Now you can add other properties in here. You can also use all, the keyword all, and it will just animate anything that can be animated that you're changing. Then you have the duration, which in this case is 0.5 seconds. So this background color would happen, the change in background color would happen over a half a second. Then you have the timing function, which is basically the effect, how smooth it is, and do you want it to start slow and end fast, or start fast and end slow, or should it be the same speed all throughout? So that's what the timing function is. You have ease in, out, and some others. And then you can also add a delay. So if you don't want the transition to start for a half a second or whatever, you can add an extra value in here for the delay if you want. All right, so in the next video, we're going to define some transitions and see how they work. All right, so let's start to get into transitions. So we're not going to do anything crazy here. I'm just going to show you how to use the property, and we're going to use it on a button. So let's just add a container here, and then inside that we'll have a button, and I'm going to give it a class of btn, and I'm going to say hover me, because that's where we're going to see the transition, is when we hover over the button. So now let's go to the style sheet, and let's just add container. I mean, the container stuff we don't have to do. I don't know, I like to wrap it in something. So we'll just do that. We'll do margin 30 pixels auto. All right, and then I just want to style the button a little bit. So let's do some padding. We'll do 10, 20, and let's set the initial background color to hexadecimal 007 BFF. And let's make the color white. And let's make the border none, and the border radius 5 pixels, cursor, pointer, and let's do a width of 200. Okay, so decent looking button. And then I'm going to add a hover effect. So let's take the button class hover, and let's change the background color to a hexadecimal value of 005 6B3. So come over here, and I hover over it, and it just changes, right? It changes right away. There's no delay or anything like that. So what we could do is add a transition onto the button and say we want to transition the background color. And remember the values. We have the property, then we have the timing, which is going to be, let's say, 0.8 seconds. Okay, and then the timing function, which I'm going to use, let's say, ease-in-out. So it'll ease in, it'll slowly go in, and then it'll slowly go out. So save that, and then pay attention closely as I hover over it. So you see how it's slower now? It doesn't just flicker to that color in one shot. It takes time. It takes 0.8 seconds. If I were to say like 2.8 seconds, it's going to take almost 3 seconds for it to get to the final state, which is this color. It starts at this color, its final state is this color. It's taking 2.8 seconds to get there. Right? I can also do a delay, like I could do 1 second for a delay, and now when I hover over it, it doesn't do anything for that 1 second. And then when I come off it, it doesn't do anything for that 1 second. So that's probably the simplest example of a transition that I can give you. Now you can also do multiple properties, like if I wanted to do color yellow on hover, and then come up here and put a comma, and then color, and then the time we'll do 0.8, same thing. Now if I leave off the timing function, it's just going to use ease, so I'll just leave that off. And then let's try it out. So now you can see that both the background color and the text color have that transition effect. Now another thing we could do is use all. So if I comment, actually let's copy that down, and then let's comment that out. And I'm going to get rid of the color part here. And instead of background color, I'm going to say all. If I do that, you'll see both the background color and the color are transitioning. And then if I were to add something else on here, like let's say width, so it's initially set to 200, let's set this to 400. Could do that, and now you'll see that it'll stretch out to 400, and it does it in a smooth way. Things like border radius, we could even do that. So we'll say border radius, which obviously it starts at 0, but now we're saying go to 50 pixels. Now, not only does it get bigger, but you see the border also changes. Anything that has a number value, or I mean, even colors are, they have number representations of them, can be animated, or you can add a transition to. Let's add opacity, which starts at 1, but we'll bring it to 0.5. So now you can see it fades out. We could do, what else? We could do box shadow. So box shadow on hover, we'll do, let's say, 2 pixels, 2 pixels, 5 pixels, RGB or RGBA, 000, and 0.5. So now hover over it, and now you can see it has that shadow. So there's a ton of different things that you can animate. And where this really comes in handy is when you start to implement JavaScript as well, because then you can add some JavaScript events and mix that with transitioning. All right, and we'll get to adding JavaScript in a little bit. So in the next video, I want to look at the transform property, which is one of the things you're going to use the most over a lot of these, because you can rotate, you can translate on the X and Y axis, move it around, you can scale. So we're going to get into the transform property next. So now we're going to look at the transform property, and this is the syntax, so just transform, and then you're going to have a specific function that you pass into this, and it can be any of these. So you have rotate, which is pretty obvious. It rotates by a number of degrees. So in this case, the logo would rotate 90 degrees. Then you have, and by the way, if you want to rotate clockwise, then positive. If you want to go counterclockwise, then it would be a negative number. Then you have scale, so you can scale by a specific number. So 1 is the default. If you do 2, it's going to double in size. If you do 0.5, it's going to shrink down half the size. Then you can also skew. I don't use this too much, but you can use skew to kind of rearrange the shape a little bit. And then translate will move along the X and Y axis. And you have translate X, which will obviously move along the X axis, which is horizontal. Positive number to go right, negative to go left. You can do translate Y for the Y axis, positive to go down, negative to go up. Okay, so let's jump in and let's try some of these out. So in the HTML, all I'm going to do, I have my logo here, this logo PNG that I'm going to use, and it should be in your starter files as well, but you can do this to any element. And I'm just going to have a container, and then let's add an image with the class of logo, and it's going to be ./logo. Okay, then we'll jump into the CSS. Let's just add some container styles. So I'll do a max width of, let's do 600 pixels, and a margin of 130 pixels auto. I'm going to display flex to move it to the middle, and justify dash content center, and align items center. And let's make the image 100% of its container. So logo, set the max width to 100%. Okay, there we go. Actually, let's make it a little smaller. We'll do 60%. Now to show you how the transform works, I could just put it right on the logo like this. So transform, and we'll do rotate, and let's say 90 degrees. And now it just does it, right? When we come to the page, it's rotated. But if we want to add a little animation, a transition, then we would do, for instance, a hover. So we'll say logo hover, and then move that transform into the hover, which if I do that, if I hover it, it does rotate, but it just is like a one-shot thing. It doesn't smoothly transition. So I would want to add transition here, let's say all for 0.5 seconds. Now, if I hover over it, now it has that animation to it. And if I want to go the other way, I could do -90, and it goes the other way. Now let's say I wanted to just move it on the x-axis. So I could do transform and then translate x. uppercase X, and then how much I want to move it. So let's say 200 pixels, right? So if I do that, then you'll see it moves 200 pixels to the left. If I want to go right, I would add a negative value. I'm sorry, if I want to go left, I would add a negative value, and it goes the other way. And the same thing goes for on the y-axis. So if I do translate y with a negative, it's going to go up. And if I do a positive value, it's going to go down. So if you want to animate things and move them around, usually you're going to use the transform translate. Now, let's see what else. You can also just use translate and then pass in the X and Y. So let's do that. Let's do translate, and then we'll do 200 pixels, 200 pixels. So that's going to just move it on the X and Y, which will make it go diagonal. Then let's see, if we want to skew, let's do transform, skew, and then we can pass in degrees. Let's do 30 degrees. And now if I hover over it, you'll see it skews the image 30 degrees. If I do negative 30 degrees, it goes the other way. And then we have, let's see, we got rotate, translate, skew. We also have scale. So let's say transform, scale. Now, if I put a 1 in here, notice there's no difference because it's 1 by default. If I do 0.5, it shrinks down. If I do 1.5, it goes up. Okay, so that's scale. Now, if you want to add, you might want to add multiple transforms, and you can do that by doing transform, and let's say we want to rotate it. So I want to rotate, let's do 90 degrees, and then let's say I want to scale it as well. Oh, no, let's move it along the x-axis. So we're going to just do translate x 100 pixels. So now it'll rotate and it'll move it. Actually, let's do 200. So it gives it kind of a weird effect. If I wanted to do scale, we'll do scale to 2. That's kind of cool. So it turns and kind of comes at you. All right, so that's transitions. Pretty easy. Like I said, where it gets really cool is when you integrate it with JavaScript, because you can like click on something here and then somewhere else something can like slide open, and that's where it really comes, where it really shines. All right, now the next video is going to be on something that's pretty simple but very common that you're going to run into, and that's positioning in the center using position absolute. Because if you just set top and left to 50%, it doesn't quite put it in the center. It puts the end of it to the center, and we need the help of translate to actually put the center of whatever we're centering into the center. So we'll do that in the next video. So this is going to be a quick, simple video, but it's something that you're probably going to run into a lot, and that is positioning something into the center when it's positioned absolute. Okay, so we know that we can, for instance, make this logo. This is the same HTML that we had in the last video. We can make this logo in the middle of the container by display flex and justify content center, align item center. We know we can do that, but what if it's positioned absolute? And there's kind of a little trick that you need to do using transform translate. So let's go into the CSS here, and I just have my container, and the logo is 30%. The max width of the container is 900. Let's give the container a background so we can see where it begins and ends. So I'll just make it light gray. So that's the container, and then I'm going to also just give it a height of 600 pixels as well, because I want to position this in the middle horizontally and vertically, and do that when it's positioned absolute. Now the container is what we want to position it within, so let's make that position relative. Okay, and then we'll go down to the logo, and then we're going to position that absolute within the relative container. And then, as you might expect, we can set top to 50% and left to 50%. So it's going to go down 50% and then from the left 50%. But if I save, you'll see it doesn't really look like it's in the center. And it is, it's just that the top left-hand corner is in the center. Okay, it's about right here, right? Because it's a square image and the top left corner is here. So when you do this, when you position When something's positioned absolute and you want it directly in the middle, what you can do is just add a transform and then use translate, which will move it along the X and Y axis. And you want it to shift upwards, right? Because you want it to go up and then shift left. And to do that, you're going to use negative values. So in here, we're going to say negative 50% for the X value and negative 50% for the Y value. And now it's shifted right into the middle. All right, so this is something, it's very simple, but you're probably going to run into this quite a bit. All right, so in this video, we're going to work a little bit with 3D effects and animation. So this is what I want to create. It's a card. It has a front side, and if I hover over it, it does a little rotate, but it has a 3D effect, and then it shows us the back side. So the front side is in its own div, the back side is its own div, and we're going to use transform to rotate it and use a couple other properties that are used for 3D animation, like back face visibility and perspective. All right, and this probably isn't something you're going to do all the time, but it is nice to know, and you can do some really cool stuff. So I'm going to close this one up. I just wanted to show you what it is we're creating. And as far as the HTML, there's not a lot at all. So let's go under the H1. We're going to have our regular container, and then inside that have a card container. And then inside that have a card. And then inside that we'll have a front class. And we'll just say front side, and then copy that down. And then we're going to have a back side. And that's going to have a class of back. So save that, and we're just going to see the text for now. And we can jump into the CSS, and I'm just going to make the background of the body light gray. So we'll do F4. All right, then we're going to do the container, which wraps around everything. That's going to have a max width of 600 and a margin of 30 pixels auto. And I want everything in the middle, so I'm going to display as a flexbox and justify content center and align items center. All right, and then we have the card container, which is really just I'm gonna have a margin top of 50 pixels and text align, set that to the center. And then the card class itself is going to have a width of 200 pixels and a height of 300 pixels. And I want to position this to be relative because the front and back are going to be positioned inside of it absolute. Now for the front, we're going to have a background color of that blue, which is going to be hexadecimal 3498 dB. And then let's give it a color of white. And we're going to give it a line height of 300 pixels, and that's what's going to give it that spacing. And then for the back, we'll do kind of the same thing, but we'll change the color. So for the background of that, it's going to be 2ECC71. So now we just have our front and back on top of each other, but what I want to do is position them both within the card, which is relative. All right, so let's do this. We'll say for front and for back, we want to position both of those to be absolute within the card, and we want the width and height to both be 100%. Oops. So height. So now we're only seeing the back side because they're in the same exact spot, front and back. The back is just on top of it because it's after it. If I were to switch spots here, then front would show, right? So now everything's in place. Now we want to work on the animation. So on the card hover, let's go right here and say card hover. We want to add a transform and we want to rotate. Okay, and we're going to rotate Y on the Y-axis 180 degrees. Now, if I do that, it rotates, but it doesn't have any smooth transition. It just kind of flicks to it. It doesn't have from one state going to the other over an amount of time. So we want to add a transition onto the card. So we want to transition the transform property. And we'll do 0.5 seconds and ease for the timing function. So now when I hover over it, it doesn't just flicker to that spot. It shows this turn, this rotate, right? Now we want to have this operate in a 3D space. So we want to actually add another property called transform style, and we're going to set this to preserve 3D. Okay, and this isn't something that I use a lot. I don't really do a lot of stuff like this, but I did want to include it in the course. So that will just kind of, it'll make it so the child elements of the card they operate in a 3D space. Now we can make this look even more 3D by adding a perspective, and the perspective we're going to put that on the card container. So here, let's say perspective. And the lower this is, the closer it's going to be to us, okay, or to the front of the screen. So if we do 100, which is low, then you can see it comes way out at us, but it has that 3D look, right? So let's set it to 1,000, which will make it not come out so far, and it looks like it's just real and it's spinning where it is, and it has a much more of a 3D look to it. So the animation is what we want. However, we're only seeing the back side. When it flips, we're seeing the back of the back side, and we don't want that. We want to see the front side. In fact, we want to see the front side when we first come to the page. So we're going to do two things. One, we're going to rotate the back as soon as we come to the page. So this right here, this transform, I'm going to copy it, put it on the back. All right, so now we're seeing the back of the back side, and we don't want to see the back of either. So what we can do is on the front and back class, we can use the backface dash visibility property, and we're going to set that to hidden so that we don't see the back. Now we see the front because the back of the back side is not going to show. If I hover over it, we're not going to see the back of the front, we're going to see the back side because of that backface visibility hidden. All right, so that's how you can create a card that looks to be, have one thing on the front and then one thing on the back. And again, this isn't something that I do too much. You may. I mean, different people do different things with CSS, but like I said, I did want to have it in the course. Now, in the next video, we're going to talk a little bit more and look a little bit more at using JavaScript with CSS. Okay, so I know this isn't a JavaScript course, and it's absolutely fine if you know zero JavaScript, but I want to show you a little bit of how we can use JavaScript to interact with our CSS, with our styles, and with our elements. And I'm going to try to explain it, but if you don't grasp it, that's okay. You can always come back to this later. And my Modern JavaScript from the Beginning course is a great place to start if you really want to learn JavaScript. But a lot of what I want you to know how to do is really just how to add and remove classes within JavaScript so that you can have event listeners like buttons, and you can click a button and then change a style somewhere by adding or removing a class to it. That will let you do a lot of different things, including having a hamburger menu, which we're going to do in the next video. But here I just want to explain the very basics on how you can actually set a variable in your JavaScript to an element in your HTML, and how you can add and remove classes either to that element or to any element on the page. All right, so let's start off by going into our HTML, and we're just going to have a container with a button. I'll give that button a class of btn, and let's just say we're going to say toggle. All right, and then I'm also going to give it an ID because I like to, when I get things from the what's called the DOM, the document object model, which you can just, it's basically just our HTML structure. I like to get it by the ID, and I like to use classes for styling. Although in JavaScript you can get it by the class. You can get it by anything, by just the element, the class, the ID, whatever. But for the ID, I'll just say button. All right, so now let's add a little bit of styling just so it doesn't look horrible. I know this might aggravate some of you, but I just feel like I need to add a little bit. So I'm just going to add a max width of 600 pixels and a margin of 30 pixels auto. And then on the button itself, we'll use the class to style it. And let's say display inline block. And let's set the cursor to a pointer. We're going to add a little bit of padding, 10 pixels and 20 pixels. Background, we'll do light blue. Color, we'll do 333. And border radius, 5 pixels, and margin, 10 pixels. All right, so we got our button styled. Now to add JavaScript, there's a few ways you can do it. You're going to go above the ending body tag, and you could just simply have script tags and then put your JavaScript in here. For instance, I could do a console.log, and whatever I put in here, like let's just say hello world, is going to show in the browser console. So if I open up the dev tools and we go to console, you should see hello world. Okay, and we can put as much JavaScript in here as we want, but it gets kind of messy. So just like with CSS, you should put it in a separate file. So let's go into the folder we're working in, which is this one, and create a script.js, and you could call it anything. And then instead of putting the JavaScript in here, we're going to keep the script tags. However, we're going to add a source, just like you would with an image. And let's add // so same directory, and then script.js. Now, if you're just starting this stuff out, you might get a little confused, and you might end up putting href on your script or putting source on your link for your CSS. That's something that when I was getting started, I did a lot. Just try to remember. I think what helped me is knowing that since it's a script tag and it starts with an S, then it took in source. That's one way that it helped me remember. So then href would be for styles. Now in that script, let's do a console log again, hello world, and now that's still working because this JavaScript file is hooked up here. Now I just want to go over variables real quick, which are just containers for data. And it could be a string, a number, it could even be an element on our page, which is what I want to ultimately do, is put this variable into put this button into a variable so that we can do things with it. So to create a variable, you need to use one of 3 keywords. You can use var, like if I wanted to create a variable called first name and set that to whatever, set that to Brad. I could use var, but that's kind of the old school way of doing it. Now you have let and const, where let allows you to, the difference between let and const is with let, you can actually reassign this. So I could say later on at some point, first name is John. And I'll do a console log of first name, and we should see John down here. Now, const stands for constant. And with const, you can't rename, or not rename, you can't reassign a variable that uses const. Down here, you'll see assignment to constant variable. Now, it's all preference on what you want to use, but what I like to do is always use const unless I know I'm going to reassign it, okay? And you'll be surprised to know that you don't often reassign variables. It can be, a variable can be an object or an array, and you can still add to that or remove from that object or array and still use const. If you're going to directly reassign it to something else, then you need to use let or var. All right, and if you don't understand that, that's absolutely fine. That's not really important for this course. But I like to use const, so I'm going to do that, and I'm going to call this variable button. And then to get this button here into this variable, I can use document. Document is an object that's included with the browser environment, and there's a bunch of methods on that. So one of those methods is get element by ID. And what this, I can pass in the name of an ID in my HTML. So I have this ID of button, so I could pass in here button like that, and then do a console log of button, and we're going to see our button with the ID of button and the class of BTN, and that has a bunch of properties on it that we can do things with. All right, so it has properties which are just values, and it also has methods on it. Now you can see the ID here of button. Should be able to get the class as well. So let's see, class list. So BTN is in there as a class. If I were to add another class on here, like hello, and then we look at the class list. Let's see, where is it? Class list right here. Now there's a hello class. So a lot of things you can do within JavaScript with these elements. So now I want to make it, actually before we do that, I want to show you another method that we can use to select things, and that is query selector. So if I do query selector, I can still get it by the ID. I just have to add this. It's basically what you would use in your CSS. If I wanted to get it by the class, I could say .btn, and now it's showing me the same thing. It's still getting that button because it has a class of btn. However, I prefer to use IDs. I'll use query selector, that's fine, but I just like to get it by the ID. So I'll put an ID of button like that. Now I want something to happen when I click this button, so it needs to have what we call an event listener. And we can create an event listener by taking the button object, okay, this is also known as an object, and it has a method called add event listener, which is a method is just a function that's attached to an object, which button is. Now in here, we can pass in the event that we want to listen for, and in this case, I want to listen for a click. And then we pass in another, what's called an argument, and this is going to be a function, so we can just say function with some parentheses, and then open some curly braces, and whatever I put in here is what's going to happen when that button is clicked. So let's do a console log, and I'll just say button clicked. Now when I click the button, you'll see down here, button clicked, and each number just represents how many times I click it. All right, now I don't want to actually do a console log. What I want to do is add a class, and I want to add a class to the body. And you can add it to anything. If we had another element like a paragraph, and I brought that paragraph in and gave it a variable, we could then add a class to the paragraph. But I want to use the body, and in JavaScript on the document you have a body property, and on that, and this body property represents the entire HTML body. In fact, why don't we do this? Why don't we console.log document body, so you can see if I click it, then it's going to log the entire body. Now on that document.body, I want to add a class. So we're going to use the class list property, which has a bunch of methods. It has add, remove, toggle, which is what I want because I want to be able to, click it, add the class, remove it, add it, remove it. So I'm going to say .toggle, which is a method. Methods have parentheses. And I want to toggle the class of dark onto the body. So now what I'm going to do is go to the Elements tab and take a look at the body tag. Let me just make this a little bigger so we can see. So if you look at that body tag and I hit this toggle, notice that now it has a class of dark. If I hit toggle again, the class goes away. Now as far as the JavaScript goes, we're doing everything that I want to do. That's all I want it to do is add and remove that class when I toggle. The rest is up to CSS. So we go into our style sheet and we add a class of dark, and let's say we want to set a background color of 333 and a text color of white. Right? So now if I save that and I click toggle, now the body turns this color because I'm adding that class of dark through my JavaScript, and in my CSS I have that defined with the background color dark. If I click it again, it removes the class of dark, so now this styling goes away and I can just toggle that. Right? If I wanted to target that H1 and do something to that, I could bring it in. So const, we'll just call this heading and say document dot, and let's do query selector, and I could just put H1 in here just like you can with CSS, and then let's say I want to do H1, or what I call it, heading dot class list dot toggle, and let's do, what do I want to do here? We'll just say yellow, and then let's add a class in the style sheet called yellow, and let's do color yellow. So now when I hit toggle, not only does the body have this dark background, but the heading also turns yellow because it gets added that class, as you can see right here. If I hit toggle again, it removes the class, goes back to the default. All right, so that alone, if you can understand what we did here, then there's a lot of things you can do. And again, including a hamburger menu, and that's what we're going to do in the next video. Okay, so we're going to build a small project here. It's going to be a nav bar with a hamburger menu. So this is the final result. We have a logo, my logo, and then a nav bar and some menu items on the side here. But once I get to a certain point, we hit that break point, then that menu goes away and we see this icon. And then if I click that icon, it's going to have the menu slide in from the right. And of course, you could have it slide in from the top, or you could just have it appear. You could do whatever. And the reason it has that animation is because we're using a transition, which we just learned about. All right, so that's what we're building. Let's go ahead and jump in, and you should have in the starter folder the logo and the script.js, which is completely empty, the style CSS, which just has the reset and the font, and then in the HTML, we're bringing in the font, and we're also bringing in font awesome because the icon, that hamburger or the lines icon, we're getting from font awesome. And I've also included the script JavaScript file. So let's get rid of the H1 here, and we're going to use a nav tag and give it a class of navbar. And in that, we'll have a container, and we'll also add a class of navbar-flex because we want to make it a flex box where the logo and the UL are in a row. So inside that, we'll have the logo. I'm going to give it a class of logo, and the source is just going to be, let's see, /logo PNG. For the alt, I'll just say Traversy Media. And underneath the image, we're going to have a div with the class of main menu, because we're going to have two menus, the main menu and the mobile menu. So for the main menu, we'll have a UL, and I'm just going to give that a class of main menu list. And in that, we'll have our list items with our links. It doesn't matter what we use for links here. And I'm just going to copy that down a few times. So the second one, I'm going to use about. This one will do services. This one will do blog. And this one will do contact. All right, so we have our menu items. The logo is going to be really big for now. And the mobile menu is going to go right under the main menu, which ends right here. But I'm just going to put a comment here for now. So this is where the mobile menu will go. And I'll put a comment here. This is the main menu. All right, now let's start to style the base styles and the nav bar. So for links, I don't want to have any underline, and I want to change the color. So let's say text decoration none, and let's set the color to 333. All right, then for the list items, I just want to set list style to none. And then let's also set for images a max width of 100% of its container. All right, now for the actual container class, we're going to set a max width, and I'm going to do 1200 pixels. For the margin, let's do 0 and auto to put things in the middle, and a little bit of padding. We'll do 2 rem on the left and right. All right, then we have the navbar class. I'll just save that for now. Then we have the navbar class, and that's going to have a background of light blue, and let's do a padding of 1 rem top and bottom, 2 rem left and right, and let's do a height of 80 pixels. All right, now we want to have the logo, obviously we want that smaller. We also want to make this a flex box so the logo is on this side and the UL is on this side. So let's say navbar and then the class of logo. I want to make that a lot smaller. So why don't we make the width 50 pixels. All right, and then for the flex, let's say navbar-flex, we want to display as a flex box. Okay, and then we're going to set the justify content, which is the horizontal space. We want to have the space in between. So space between, and then align items, the vertical spacing, we want to center that. All right, now the reason the logo is way down here is because the UL, it takes up this much space, and this is set to be in the center. So now the UL, we want to make that a flex box and make them go horizontal. So remember, that has a class of main menu list. So let's say navbar main menu dash list, and let's set that display to flex. Okay, as soon as I do that, it goes horizontal. And then let's do a gap. We need some spacing there. We'll do 1.5 rem. And let's do align items center. Now on larger screens, this looks fine, right? That looks fine. But on smaller screens, you start to have the logo run into it. So we want to fix that up. Now I do want to have a hover effect on the menu. So let's say navbar. And I want all links in the navbar that are hovered to have this. And we're just going to make the color blue. All right, cool. Now for the mobile menu, actually before we do that, we want this main menu to hide on smaller screens. Obviously we don't want to show this and the hamburger menu with the mobile stuff. So let's add a media query, and let's say max width 768. Then we want to take the navbar main menu and we want to display none. So that goes away, but if I make the screen bigger, then it shows. Now let's add the mobile menu. So we're going to go back into our HTML here and go down to where we have the comment, and we're going to have a class of mobile-menu. And this is also where the hamburger button or icon is going to go. So let's have a class of mobile-menu-toggle. And inside that, we'll have our font awesome icon, which will be an I tag with FAS, and then FA-bars is the icon, and then FA-2X for the sizing. Save that, and now we can see the icon. Now under that div, the toggle div, is where we're going to have our mobile menu. So let's give that a class of mobile menu, let's say mobile menu items. And then in that we'll have the UL, which will be mobile menu list. And then we can just copy the list items from here because they're going to be the same. In some cases you might have different things in the mobile menu, but it's going to be the same here. Now if I save, it's going to show obviously, but ultimately we want this to hide unless we click this button and have JavaScript add a specific class. All right, but before we do that, let's style the mobile menu so that it is put in the middle here, has a background, and just style it correctly. So let's jump back into our CSS and let's go down here, and we're going to style the mobile menu. So first off, let's do navbar, and let's do mobile menu items, because that's what actually surrounds the UL, right? The mobile menu class surrounds the icon as well. So for mobile menu items, let's position this to be absolute, because I want to put it right in the middle here. So the links will be in the middle, and we'll have this blue background, and we ultimately want that to slide in. So to position it where we want it, let's do absolute, but I'm going to say from the top, move it down 80 pixels, because this navbar is 80 pixels. So I want it to start right here. And then let's set bottom. So bottom 0, because we want it to stretch, this whole area. So bottom 0, and then left will also do 0. And then the width, I want it to be 100%. And then we're going to have a background, and let's use an RGBA. And it's going to be that light blue, so it's 154 and 192 204, and 0.5 for the alpha value. And then I want to align, so text align to the center. And then I'm going to add a transform and set the translate X, and I want to set that to 100%. However, what that's going to do is it's going to push it to the right 100% and put it outside of the screen, because that's where we want it to start. And then when we click, we want it to come in from there, from the right. So if I do that now, we're not going to be able to see it, which is what we want ultimately, but we need to finish styling it, so I'm just going to comment that one out. Now when it comes in, we also want it to transition and slide in. So we also need to add a transition here on the transform property. Let's do 0.3 seconds and ease. All right, so when we do bring it in, it will slide in. Now for this, the UL, that has a class of mobile menu list. So let's say navbar and then a class of mobile menu dash list. Let's make that a flex box. However, we want it to be a column because we want them to be on top of each other. So flex direction is going to be column, which doesn't look any different than it just did. However, now we can use like align items. We're going to say center. And let's give this a height of 100%. And I'm going to add some padding to the top. Let's do 300 pixels. And then let's do a gap. So the gap will do 2 rem. That'll separate the links. And then the font size, I'm going to make that a little bigger. So font size will do 1.2 rem. Like that. Okay, so now when we do hover over the icon, I want a pointer. So let's say navbar, and then we have mobile dash menu dash toggle, and let's set the cursor is going to be a pointer. All right, and then what I want to happen when we click this is in our JavaScript, we're going to want to add a class of active. So let's add that class. We'll say navbar, and it's going to be on the mobile menu items. So let's say mobile menu items and then dot active. And when that class is active, when that class is active, instead of having the transform translate X 100%, we want to bring it back to its normal position, which would be translate X 0. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. It's going to start off screen with this, but then when we click and we add that active class, it's going to be put into where it is right now so we can see it, which would be 0. Okay, and then the last thing we want to do here is make it so we can't see the mobile menu starting out. So let's say navbar and then mobile dash menu, and we're going to set that to display none. Now mobile menu surrounds the toggle as well. So on smaller screens, because obviously, you know, it's not showing right now. So on smaller screens, let's say navbar mobile menu, and let's set display to block on small screens. All right, now to make this part go away, all we have to do is uncomment this, because now it's translate on the x-axis 100%, so it's pushed off the screen. Now the problem we have right now is we have a scroll bar at the bottom, and we don't want that. So to get rid of that, we can go on the body and we can set overflow on the x-axis, which means the horizontal scroll bar, we want to set that to hidden. So now that's gone and there's no way for us to see the stuff that's off screen. So now all we have left is our JavaScript. So let's jump into the script file. Now you don't really have to do this, but I like to wait until the document object model is loaded before we do anything. So on the document, I'm going to add an event listener, and the event I'm going to listen for is DOM content loaded. Once that happens, we're going to run a function, which we can put right here, and then we can do what we want. In this case, we want to get the hamburger menu for one thing. So let's call that toggle button for the variable, and we're going to select it with document.query selector. And I'm going to say I want to select in the navbar class, I want to get the mobile menu toggle class. So that'll grab the button. Then we want the actual mobile menu. So I'll give that a variable of mobile menu. Set that to document.query selector. And we can get that with the selector class navbar and then class mobile menu items. All right, so we have what we want. Now let's take the toggle button and let's add a click event onto that. So add event listener, and we want to listen for a click. And when that happens, we want to run a function, and we simply want to add the class of active. So mobile menu, and then remember we have, just like in the last video, we have that class list object, which has a toggle method, and we want to toggle the class of active. All right, and if we look in our CSS, that active class, what that's going to do is put it back to here, right? Translate X puts it right where it's supposed to be. Because when we start out, it's translate X 100%. It's pushed off to the side. So now let's click that, and there we go. It slides in from the right. And it transitions. If I didn't have that transition property, it still works, but it just kind of pops in. Right? There's no animation. So transitions make things just look a lot nicer. You have, nice clean animations. And that's it. So now you can use this code. I mean, you can change things up a little bit. You probably have different class names and stuff like that, and obviously different colors and all that. But you see the fundamental of this, which is just adding a class, right? We're just adding that active class, and that's going to show the menu. And you don't always have to use like a translate X. One thing we could do is initially set, or let's do this. We could initially set display none, and you'll see this quite a bit. And then when you add the active class, instead of doing a transform translate, we can then just simply set display to, block. If I do that and I click, then it's just now changing it from display none when we first come to the page to display block when we add the active class. All right. However, I like the effect of the slide in, so I'm going to just go back and put the transform translate. All right, cool. And like I said, we'll be using this pretty much the same concept. Maybe the code will be a little different, but same concept we'll be using in the next two big projects. But what I'd like to do in the next couple videos is look at keyframes and animations. All right, so we looked at the transition property, which is one way of animating elements. Now we're going to look at CSS keyframes, which is another way. Now keyframes allow you to create pretty complex animations by defining the start and end points of an animation, and also any point in between. And keyframes are defined using the @keyframes rule, and you can define multiple keyframes in a single keyframes rule. And each frame is defined by a percentage value, which represents the progress of the animation. You can also use the to and from keywords, which I'll go over as well. Now, this example here, you can see we have a keyframe called slide, and we're saying at 0%, we want the transform translate X to be 0. At 50%, it'll be 50 pixels, and at 100%, it'll end at 100 pixels. And then to apply this to a specific element, you would just add it in the CSS inside of an animation property. So here we're saying animation slide, which is the name of the keyframe, and then the duration, the timing function, and also you can make it repeat infinite if you want, or if you want it to only run once, you can do that as well. All right, so let's look at some examples. So we're just going to create a container, and I'm just going to have a div with the class of box inside of it. All right, and then in the style sheet, let's go ahead and just add container, set a max width of 1100 pixels, margin 30 auto, and then for the box, I'm going to set a width of 100 pixels, And I'm going to set a height also of 100 pixels, and we'll give it a background of coral. Okay, so there's our box. Now, all I'm going to do is define a keyframe that changes the width or animates the width. So down at the bottom here, let's say at keyframes. So it's going to be plural, at keyframes. And then whatever we want to call this, I'm going to call it animate 1. You can call it anything. Now, you can use percentages, or if we're just going from one state to another, like one width to another, we could use from and to. So we can say from and put some styles in there, and then to and put some in there. So let's say we're starting with a width of 100 pixels, and then by the end of the animation, we want the width to be 500 pixels. All right, and then to apply this to this box, we just use the animation property, and we set it to animate 1 because that's what I called it. You could call this anything and then use it here. Now, in addition to just the name, we want the duration. So let's say 2 seconds. And as soon as I save, you'll see that it goes from 100 to 500 in 2 seconds. If I make this higher, like 5 seconds, then it's going to go slower because it takes 5 seconds total. If I do 0.5, a half a second, then it goes really fast. But I'm going to put that to 2. Now notice how it goes back to the default when it ends. If you want to change that, you can add a property called animation fill mode, and you can set that to forwards. So if I do that, you'll see when it gets to the end, it stays there. So, I mean, it's up to you. It depends on what you're doing and what kind of animation you're creating if you want it to actually stay where it's at. Now, you can also add a delay if you want with the animation delay property. So let's say delay, and I'm going to put 2 seconds, and then I'm going to refresh the page or reload, and you can see it waited 2 seconds until it starts. So that's the delay. Now there's a few other properties I want to show you. I'm going to just comment out the delay, and I want to look at animation dash iteration dash count, and this is how many times you want it to run. Let's set that to 3 and save. So we got 1, 2, 3, and then it just stays. Now you can also make this infinite. If I do that, then it'll just keep going. All right, so it'll just keep going forever, but I think I'm going to just comment that out as well. So the next property I want to show you is, let's do the animation direction. So you can actually reverse it. So animation direction, I'm going to set that to reverse, and now it'll go the other way. If I change it back to infinite, it will just keep doing it, but you can see it's going backwards. So that's animation direction. Now we can also change the timing function. So animation timing function, and we can do ease, for instance, which is gonna, you know what, I'm gonna comment out the reverse as well. So what ease does is it's slow at the beginning and at the end, but fast in the middle. Now you could also do linear, and what that'll do is just make it an even speed the whole time. Then you can also do ease in, and what that'll do is it'll start slow and then speed up, and then ease out is the opposite, where it'll start fast and then slow down. You can also use cubic Bezier values and define your own values. All right, so yeah, I think that those are the main properties I want to show you. Now you can add other styles in here, like we just did the width, but let's say we want to also do background, we'll say background color, and we'll start with, what are we using, coral? So we'll say coral, but then we want to end with, let's say we want to end with light blue. All right, so we'll save that, and it's still going to do the width, but it's also going to change the color. I'll just change that back to infinite, and now it'll keep going, and it will change from coral to light blue. Now we can also move things around the page. So let's say we set this position of the box to absolute, and then down in the from, so we'll begin with top 0, but then let's say we want to end with top and then 100 VH, which will just be the entire height of the viewport. So let's save that, and now you can see it starts at the top and then just moves down. So you can move things all around. There's a lot of stuff you can do, really cool stuff with keyframes and animation, and it does get difficult because you have a lot of things that you'll need to do and need to animate and target, but there's some really cool stuff, and you can just do a Google search for some of the cool projects. Even if you go to like CodePen, I think it's .io, they have some really cool projects. So in the next video, we'll take it a step further, and we're going to create a little CSS animation loader for, like, if you were fetching data from a server and you want to show a little loader while you're fetching it. All right, guys, so now we're going to create this CSS loader, and this is the final result from our keyframes, and we're going to have two separate keyframes, one to spin and one to bounce. That's why we get this cool effect of kind of spinning, bouncing. This one's going around that one. All right, so that'll be the final result. We'll start off by just creating just a square to spin, and I can show you how to use percentages and stuff like that, and then we'll create those two circles by using the before and after pseudo elements. So let's get rid of the H1. I don't want to have that on the page. We're just going to have a container, and then we're going to have a loader. No text in it or anything like that. So in the style sheet, let's add the container classes. I want this to take up the whole height. So let's say 100 VH, and then I don't want any margin. And then I'm also going to display flex because I want to put it in the middle. So we can do justify dash content center, and we can do align items center. Center. All right, and then for the loader, we're going to do a width of 80 pixels, a height of 80 pixels, and I want to position this to be relative, and then I'm just going to give it a background of hexadecimal 3498 dB, which is a blue color. So we just have a blue square for now. So let's create an animation using keyframes, and I'm going to call this one spin, and then I'm going to say at 0% I want the transform property, and then I want to rotate. I'm going to set the rotate to 0. So that's to begin with. Then at the end, which would be 100%, I want to set transform rotate to 360 degrees. So it'll do a full turn like that, right? Now, if you're just using 0 and 100%, that's the same as doing to and from. I could put to and from here and it'd be the same exact thing. But with percentages, you can add other percentages in there and other points. So let's add that animation with the animation property, so spin, and then the duration will do 2 seconds. Now in the last video I showed you a bunch of different properties, like the animation timing function, things like that. You can also put those right in the animation property. So you don't have to have multiple, properties. Like we can say we want this to be linear. For the timing function, we also want it to be infinite, which means just to keep going. So if I save that, now we just have a spinning square. Now we could add another point in here, like let's say at 50%, and let's just add some colors in here. So we'll do background. So at 0%, we'll start off with the color of 3498 dB. So that'll be the start. And then at 50%, let's say we want to do background of, let's say, E7463C, or C3C, sorry. And then at the 100%, so we want to end with the background being the same color as this. So we'll just grab that. And so now if I save, what's going to happen is it starts blue, in the middle it's red, and then at the end it's blue again, and it's just going to keep doing that. two circles that kind of rotate around each other. So we're going to change things up. This is just to give you an example of the different points. So what I'm going to do is actually get rid of the background on the loader, because I don't actually want a background color on that. And then I'm going to get rid of, let's see, for this I'm just going to have 100%, and I'm just going to set it to 360 degrees. Okay, and again, if I did have a background here, like let's say background black, it'll just spin because I don't have the 0% here, but it's just like as if I did and it was set to 0. All right, so that'll make it spin. So let's get rid of that black background. Now for the circles, I'm actually going to put those on the before and after pseudo elements. So let's say loader, and then we're going to do : before, and I want loader : after. So you can kind of look at these as ghost elements. We can add styles here, but they're not actually in the DOM, or they're not actually in the HTML. Now remember, we have to have a content. We're not putting anything in there, but we can just set it to an empty string. And then I'm going to position it to be absolute. And then let's set the position top 0 from left 35 pixels. And let's set a width of 30 pixels and a height of 30 pixels. And I want it to be a circle, so I can set the border radius to 50%. And then I'm going to set the background color to hexadecimal 3498 dB. Okay, so now I have the circle. And this is on the loader, right? These before and after, and that loader still has that spin attached to it. Now we actually have two circles here on top of each other, because we have one on the after and one on the before. So why don't we take the one that's after and move it and also change the color? So we can do that by saying, let's take loader after, which already has all this stuff on it. So all I'm going to do is add to it a left value of negative 35 pixels. So I'm going to move it to the left. And then I'll set the background to that red color, which is going to be hexadecimal E74C3C. And I'll save that, and now I have the red circle. Okay, so the before is the blue, right? Or it starts off, but they both start off at blue, but then I'm saying take the after, move it a little bit, and change the color. Now I also want to add the bounce effect. So let's go down with our keyframes, and let's add another one. So keyframes, and we'll call this one bounce. And I'm going to set 0. Now we can also do this, 0 and 100%. Rather than putting them both, if you're going to have the same style, you can just use a comma. That has to have a % though. Okay, and I'm going to set the transform, and I want to use translate Y. So translate Y, which is going to move it along the Y axis, because I want it to bounce, up and down. So let's start it off and end it at 0, but then at 50%, right? So in the middle, I want it to be, let's go negative 30, because we want it to go up, so that would be negative. If I put positive, it'll move down. And I only want it to go up a little bit, so 30 pixels I think is good. So let's just grab that, and instead of 0, let's do negative 30 pixels. Now I want to apply this to the before and after. We have the spin on the actual loader, but I'm going to put this animation on the before and after. So it'll have both animations. So let's say bounce, and let's do 2 seconds. I'm going to do infinite, and I'm going to do ease. Let's say ease dash in dash out. Save it, and now it has a different effect because it's also bouncing. If I remove the spin, that's the bounce animation. So I'm sure that you can just imagine all the different things you can do, and I would encourage you, if this is something that interests you, to experiment a little bit and read more into keyframes and animations and transitions and build some cool stuff. Take a look at CodePen. That's probably where you're going to find some really cool examples that are practical, that you'll understand and you can see all the code for. All right, so that's it, guys. In the next video, I want to do another little project, and we're going to create a 3D rotating cube. All right, in this video, we're going to create a little rotating cube, and we're going to use some of the properties that have to do with 3D, like transform style, preserve 3D, and also translate Z, which we haven't really looked at yet. So this is an example of what we'll do. We're going to have the cube with 6 sides, top, bottom, left, right, front, back, and we'll rotate it. We'll create an animation that rotates it on both the X and the Y axis. So let's jump into the HTML, and this will be really quick. We just want our main container, then we'll have the cube, and the cube is going to have 6 faces. So let's do, we'll do class of face, and let's create 6 of those. But each one is also going to have a side. So this is going to be front, and then this will be back. Then we'll do right and left, and then top and bottom. All right, so that'll be our HTML. Now in the style CSS, let's add the basic container stuff. So I'm going to add a perspective here. And remember, the lower, the kind of the closer to you it is, closer to the front of the screen. 1,000 pixels should be good for that. And then width, we're going to do 200 pixels, height, 200 pixels, and margin, 50 pixels, and auto. Okay, then we want the cube class, and the cube, I'm going to position that relative because the faces are going to be positioned absolute within the cube. And we want the cube to take up 100% of its width, 100% width of its container and 100% height of its container. And then we're also going to add this transform style and set that to preserve 3D. That way the child elements will be in a 3D space and behave how we need them to. Then we're going to have the face class, which is on all of these divs, and that's what we're going to position absolute. And we're going to set the width to 200 pixels, the height of 200 pixels, the line height of 200 pixels, and text align to the center, and then font size we'll do 20 pixels. All right, so we have them just basically all in the same exact spot right now. So for each side, we're going to take the class, so for instance the front, and they're all going to have different background colors. So let's set the background color here to red. We'll do F00, and then we're going to set a transform and then a translate Z value. Now translate Z, I don't think we've talked about. We know that translate X moves it along the X axis, translate Y moves it this way, but translate Z goes from basically front to back, from where you are towards your screen that way. I can't really make that movement with my mouse because I'm on a 2D plane. So translate Z, we're going to set that to 100 pixels. Okay, so if I don't have that translate Z, we're right here, but then we're moving it along the Z axis 100 pixels. That makes it a little bigger. And we're going to do this with all the different sides. So now for the back, let's just copy this and set that to back. And for the color, we'll do blue, so 00F, right? And then in addition to translate Z, I want to rotate it, because if I just do that, it's going to be in the same exact spot as the front, right? So I want to rotate and put it on the back, which would be 180 degrees, right? So picture if I were to turn it all the way around. So we'll rotate on the y-axis, and let's do 180 degrees. And there we go. Now you can't see it because front is in front of it. However, if we add our animation, we will be able to see it because we want to rotate. So let's come down here and let's add keyframes. And let's call this rotate cube. And at 0%, we're going to set the transform and then rotate. We'll just rotate on the y-axis for now. We're going to start at 0 degrees and then we want to end. So 100%, we want to end at 360 because we want to make it just turn all the way around. So transform, rotate y, and then 360 degrees. And then we'll apply that animation to the cube. So right here, animation, set that to rotate cube. Let's do 5 seconds. I want it to keep going, so we're going to use infinite. And let's make it linear for the timing function. So now it's rotating on the y-axis, and you can see that the blue is on the back, right? Because it's rotated 180 degrees. Now for the sides, what do you think we're going to do for the right and left? We're going to create those, so I'll just copy this, and then let's do right. And we'll change the color here to, what do we got? F0, let's do 0, 0, F0, so we'll do green. Now, if I keep this rotate y at 180, it's just going to replace the right, where did I have that? It's just replace the back. So I don't want that. I want it on the side. So let's not go quite that far. Let's do 90, which would be the side. Now we have the front and the back. Okay, the back is 180 rotated. The right is 90 degrees rotated. Now, what about the left? If you want to kind of, do this yourself, you can. I mean, it's actually pretty simple. So for the other side, we can just set it to the negative value. So let's copy this, and let's make this the left class. And for the color, we'll do FF0. And then we want to rotate, since we want to put it in that empty space that's on the other side of right, we want to rotate negative 90. So now we have all the sides covered, the front, back, left, and right. Now to see the top and bottom, we can add another rotate in the animation on the x-axis, start at 0 degrees, and then end. Along with the rotate y, we want to do rotate x, and that's going to be 360 degrees. Save it, and now we have the rotation, but you can see the top and bottom aren't filled in. So to do that, let's go ahead and grab this and set that to top. And for the color, for the top, let's do 0FF. And then for the rotate, we're now going to do rotate on the x-axis for the top. And we're going to set that to 90 degrees. So now that should fill in that empty space on the top. And then for the bottom, I'm sure you can guess what we're going to do for that. We have the bottom class. For a color, let's do F0F, and then we just have to do rotate on the x-axis negative 90. And now that's put in the correct spot. So it's actually pretty simple. We're just rotating, putting them in the correct areas. If we didn't have this preserve 3D, then it's going to look like this. So you want to make sure you have that transform style, because that makes the child elements of the cube render in a 3D space. And of course, you can make this faster or slower. I could do like 15 seconds. That's going to be really slow. I could do 0.5. That's going to be really fast and make me dizzy. But yeah, so that's it. Let's move on to the next video. So we're going to do a small project here. It's basically like a presentation website. It's not something you'd have live. It's something that you would have at like an office meeting in lieu of like a PowerPoint or a keynote. So you can see we have this page, welcome to my presentation, with a next button. Also, when we first come to the page, there's a little animation. The text, the heading comes in from the top, the paragraph comes in from the side. If we click next page, it's going to animate or scroll down to the next page. And we have a previous button, so we can go back up. We can go to the next page. and the next one, which is the last page, so it doesn't have a next button, only a previous. Now, in the past, we would have to use JavaScript and maybe even jQuery. I think the first time I did this project in the first version of the course, we had to use jQuery for the scrolling. All right, so it's pretty cool that we can do this stuff without any JavaScript at all. So let's jump into the HTML. So basically, we have nothing but an H1, and we're going to just add in, let's get rid of the H1. And we're going to have 4 sections, and each section is going to represent a page. So let's put a comment of page 1, and then we'll do a section, and each section will have an ID with that page number. So page 1, and we'll do a class of page, and also a class of page. Actually, we don't need the class. We have the ID that specifies the page, so we can just do that. And then in the section, we'll have an H1. The first one is just going to say, welcome to my presentation, and then we'll have a paragraph with just some dummy text. I'll do lorem 30. And then under that paragraph is where we have our links, which are going to be wrapped in a div. So we'll have an A tag, and that's going to go to # page 2. And I'm also going to give it a class of btn. And we'll say next page. And then I do want to use font awesome. So let me just grab that real quick. And you can just go to cdnjs.com. Just go grab this real quick. Yeah, so if you go to cdnjs.com and just search for font, you'll see it right here. I'm going to grab the link tag and then just put that right here, because I just want to have a little down arrow. So after the next page text, let's put an I tag, and we'll do class FAS, FA, second class is FA-arrow-circle-down. Yeah, so now we have that down arrow. Now I'm going to copy page 1, this whole section, and then under it we're going to have page 2, so we can change that. And then for the H1, I'm just going to change it to say page 2. And then for the links, we do want a next page, which will go to page 3, but we also want a previous. So I'm going to copy this A tag, and then right above it, we're going to set this to prev page, which will go to page 1, and I'm also going to do the circle up icon. Okay, so now we have that. And then let's copy page 2, the whole section, and then we'll create page 3. So this, change that to 3. The previous is going to go to 2, and the next is going to go to 4. Okay, that's page 3. Then one more. This is going to be page 4, and there's not going to be a next, so we can get rid of that, and then just change the previous to go to 3. And that's it for the HTML. So now let's jump into the style sheet. And I'm actually going to use nesting in this file because we haven't really used nesting too much. It is a very new feature of CSS. And I also want to add some custom properties. So let's add on the root scope a few custom properties for the colors. So we can say page 1 color, and I'm going to set that to steel blue. Copy that down 4 times, or copy it 3 times, and we'll have 2, 3, and 4. This one is going to be tan, this one is going to be teal, and this one is going to be slate blue. All right, and then I'll also have a custom property for the animate speed of switching pages. So let's say animate-speed, and I'll set that to 2 seconds by default. All right, so now we want to make sure that we have the smooth scroll. So remember, we want to put that on the HTML element. So let's just add HTML here with a comma, and then we can say scroll. So scroll behavior, and set that to smooth. All right, now let's make each section take up the entire viewport. So remember, the sections have a class of page, and if we set the height to 100 VH, then each one will take up the whole page. And if I click next page, it should scroll down, and we should have that smooth scroll. So we already have that functionality. Now we just need to make this look better. So I'm going to go ahead and display as flex because I want to move everything to the middle. So I'm going to, and I also want to select, not select, but make the flex direction a column so that they're on top of each other. And then let's set justify content to the center, align items to the center, and text align to the center. So that'll put everything right smack dab in the middle. And then for padding, we'll do 0 top and bottom, 4 rem left and right. Probably do a little less than that, 3 rem. And let's see, let's make the color, I'm going to make the color white because of the background colors we're going to use. I know we can't see the text yet, but let's go ahead and add the background colors. So we'll say page colors, and we'll take page -1, set the background to var -- page -1 color, save that, and that didn't work. Oh, you know what? We didn't add the classes of page 1 through 4. So you could either add classes or just use the ID. So I'll just use the ID. That's fine. So that gives it the color. Now we might as well add the rest of these. Okay, so we got page 2, which is going to be page 2 color, page 3, which will be 3, 4, which will be 4. So now you can see the different color pages. Now let's style the content, the H1 and the paragraph. So this is where I'm actually going to do a little bit of nesting. So we'll have the page class and then any H1 within that. Actually, did I already have the page class? I do. We have it up here. So why don't we go in here and say for any H1 that's in the page class, we're going to set the font size to 4 rem, the line height to 1.2, and the margin to 2 rem. And we can make this a little bigger. All right, and then for the paragraph, we'll nest that in here too, and set that font size to 1.3 rem. Okay, so now we want to do the button. So I'm going to go down here, btn, and let's display it as an inline block. And I'm just going to make this a little smaller. Okay, so we got inline block, and then let's do padding, 1 rem, 2 rem, and let's do background. We'll do light gray, and let's do color 333. Let's do text decoration, none. Let's do margin top, 3 rem. Okay, push that down a bit. Font size, I'm going to do 1.1 rem. And what else? Border, we'll set that to none. Okay, and then any transitions. So I want to transition any properties that we can, because we are going to add a hover. So we'll just do like 0.5 seconds and ease in. All right, now I want to add a hover. So remember, when we're nesting, we can do things like this, ampersand : hover. And let's set the background to 333 and the color to white. So now if I hover over it, and you can see it has that smooth transition because of this. Okay, now when there's 2 buttons, when there's a previous, I want this to be dark by default. So let's do a class of btn-dark, and let's set the background to 333, color to white, and I guess on hover we'll just change the opacity to 0.9, make it a little lighter. And then on the previous buttons, let's add the button dark class. So let's see, right here, so I'm going to add btn dark, and then on page 3, btn dark. All right, cool. So now all I want to do, well, actually let's make it a little bit more responsive where the text isn't so big on small screens. So to do that, we'll go down to the bottom here and let's say media, max width 768, and let's do the page. So I'm going to do page and then nest H1, and let's set the font size, let's do 3.5 rem. Okay, that makes that a little smaller, and then still nested within the page, paragraph font size, let's do 1.1 rem. All right, and then the last thing I want to do is on the top here, I want the text to animate in. So let's create, let's see, I want to target page 1. We could put it in here, but I want to leave this area just for the colors. So let's just go down here and say page 1. And for the H1, I'm going to set transform, because we want it to start off the page. So we want to do translate, and I want it to come down, which means we need it to start up above, out of the screen. So let's say translate Y, and we'll do negative 1200 pixels, which should bring it off the screen. So if I save, now we can't see the heading. And then same with the paragraph. Let's do paragraph, and that's going to, we want it to come in from the left, which means we want to set the translate X property initially to be, let's do negative 1800 pixels. So now that's gone as well when we come to the page. So to animate it, we're going to have a couple keyframes, and this one we'll call heading, or let's say heading move. And all we want this to do is go to, we don't even have to have a from, because we're going to start from, here, but we want to then go to the translate Y 0, which is its natural position. Okay, for my semicolons. Okay, now we also want to do the paragraph, so let's copy that keyframe, and this one will be, we'll just call it text move, and that we want to set to translate X 0. Now we can just apply those keyframes to the H1 and paragraph by using animation, and that's going to be heading move, and we have the speed, remember the animate speed. I'm sorry, I think I said the animate speed was for the scroll. It's not, it's for this animation. I don't know why I said that. So we want to do animation and then heading move, and then our variable for animate speed, and then let's say forwards, and then ease, forwards meaning it's going to stay where it animates to, and then ease in. Okay, and then I'm just going to copy that line, come down here to the paragraph, and same thing, except we're going to set this to use the text move. All right, so let's save that and come over here, and the text should be coming down. So let's see, translate Y negative 1200 pixels, heading move, var animate speed. Let's look at that. Animate speed 2 sec. Oh, there's no colon here. There we go. All right, so now it works. Okay, so that's it. And I know this isn't the prettiest thing in the world, but You could make this look better. You could style it a little more, maybe give it some background image, and you could have your own custom PowerPoint. All right, so that's going to be the end of this section. And let's see, what are we doing next? I believe we're jumping into the next project. Yeah, so we're going to build a website basically for like a course sale website called Tutor. And this will have quite a bit to it, so it'll be much bigger than the Lumina Creative project. And we'll also have a little bit of JavaScript. We're going to have a hamburger menu and some other stuff as well. All right, so I will see you there.